My brothers and sisters, one of the greatest challenges of walking with God is learning to trust Him when you can't trace Him. There are seasons when heaven feels quiet, when your prayers seem to hang in the air, when the answer you desperately seek doesn't seem to come. And in those moments, the enemy will whisper, God has forgotten you. He's not listening. You're on your own. But let me remind you today, God's silence is not God's absence. He is still moving, still working, still orchestrating details behind the curtain of your life. Silence is often His strategy. And if you pay attention, there are signs that even in the quiet, He is helping you. When doors close in your life, it can feel like rejection. It can feel like failure. It can feel like God is ignoring your prayers or withholding something from you. We are taught to believe that open doors are blessings and closed doors are curses. But that is not always true. Many times, the closed door is the very thing God uses to protect us from harm, redirect us to His will, or prepare us for something greater than we imagined. What feels like a setback may actually be a setup. What feels like rejection may actually be divine redirection. You see, God knows the end from the beginning. He sees what you cannot see. He knows the traps that the enemy has set, the detours that would lead to destruction, and the burdens you're not ready to carry yet. So sometimes in His silence, He lets a door close to save you from walking into something that would have broken you. Think about it this way. When you pray for a job and the opportunity doesn't come through, you may be tempted to think that you weren't qualified enough or that God ignored your request. But what if that job would have drained your soul, robbed you of time with your family, or pulled you away from your true calling? When you pray for a relationship to work out, and suddenly the person walks away, your heart may break. But what if God saw things you couldn't see? What if He knew that person's intentions weren't pure, or that being tied to them would have pulled you further from Him? That closed door was not punishment. It was protection. We don't like the sting of rejection. We don't like to hear no. We live in a world that tells us to chase every dream, knock on every door, and force every lock until it opens. But when you belong to God, not every door is meant for you. Some doors that look golden on the outside are rotten on the inside. Some doors that shine with opportunity are lined with traps you cannot yet perceive. And in His love, God will sometimes keep those doors shut. He may not explain it right away. He may not reveal His reasons in the moment. His silence can feel like abandonment, but later you look back and realize that the closed door was a gift. Imagine Joseph in the Old Testament. His brothers sold him into slavery, and doors kept closing one after another. Betrayed by family, thrown into prison, forgotten by people he helped. If he had only judged God's plan by the closed doors, he might have assumed that God was finished with him. But every closed door was a step closer to the palace, a step closer to his assignment, a step closer to the dream God placed in his heart. Had those doors remained open, Joseph would have settled in places far beneath his calling. The truth is, we only see a sliver of the picture, but God sees the entire canvas. When he closes a door, it is not to deprive you, but to preserve you. He knows what lies ahead. He knows what you can handle and what you cannot. He knows which opportunities would lift you and which ones would crush you. In his silence, he is guiding you without announcing every move. He is answering your prayer, not by giving you what you asked for, but by protecting you from what you didn't know to ask him to block. So the next time a door closes unexpectedly, instead of panicking, instead of doubting God's love, pause and thank him. Thank him for protecting you from what you couldn't see. Thank him for knowing what's best, even when you don't understand. Because sometimes God's greatest blessings come not in the doors that open, but in the ones that close. There are moments in life when everything around you seems to be falling apart, when the bills are piling up. The doctor's report is not what you wanted to hear. The relationship is breaking under pressure, or the future looks uncertain. Normally, the natural response is fear, worry, and sleepless nights. Yet in the middle of the storm, you sometimes find yourself sitting with a strange calmness, a quiet confidence that makes no sense in light of the circumstances. That peace is not something you can manufacture. It is not the result of positive thinking, nor is it a denial of reality. It is the presence of God guarding your heart in silence. That is his way of reminding you that even when he does not speak, he is holding you. Peace that cannot be explained by logic is one of the clearest signs that God is at work. It is the kind of peace that Philippians 4 talks about, the peace that surpasses all understanding, guarding your heart and mind. You may not have the answers. You may not see the outcome. And you may not even know how things will work out. But somehow you know it will be all right. That peace is God's way of saying, be still and know that I am God. You may not hear his voice, but you can feel his presence steadying your soul. Have you ever been in a situation where people around you were panicking, yet you remained calm? Maybe you were waiting for test results, and instead of falling apart, you felt anchored. Maybe you lost something dear to you, but instead of collapsing, you found strength to keep moving forward. Others looked at you and wondered how you could remain steady under pressure. And the only explanation was that God had placed his peace inside you. It wasn't denial. It wasn't because you didn't care. It was because heaven was holding you together. This peace is not always loud. Sometimes it comes as a gentle whisper in the middle of the night when you can't sleep and suddenly your heart stops racing. Sometimes it shows up when you're driving alone and you feel a calmness settle over you that brings tears to your eyes. Sometimes it is a verse that comes to mind at just the right moment, calming your soul like a soft blanket over a restless child. That is God speaking in silence. He may not answer with thunder. He may not split the sky open. But he wraps you with a quiet assurance that says, you are not alone. Peace does not mean the absence of problems. Peace does not mean the storm has stopped raging. Peace means that even in the storm, you are not shaken. It is the supernatural evidence that your heart is resting in someone greater than the storm. God often allows silence so that this peace becomes your teacher. Instead of relying on what you see or hear, you begin to rely on his unseen hand. Instead of looking for quick fixes, you learn to rest in his promises. This kind of peace builds resilience. It deepens faith, and it gives you courage to keep moving when everything else says quit. Many times, people look for God's help in external changes. They want the sickness to disappear, the problem to be solved, the situation to be reversed. But often God first gives peace before he gives deliverance. He gives strength inside before he changes things outside. That is his silent way of preparing you, assuring you that he is already in control. The peace he gives becomes the anchor that keeps you from drifting when the waves crash against your life. It becomes the proof that while you cannot hear him, he is working on your behalf. And that unexplainable peace, that supernatural calmness, is the silent evidence that God is closer than you think. One of the ways God often works in silence is by sending the right people into your life at the right time. Sometimes you don't even realize it in the moment. A conversation feels casual. A meeting seems accidental. A friendship forms without planning. Yet later you look back and see how divinely orchestrated it was. You realize that person came with encouragement you didn't know you needed, with wisdom you weren't even asking for, or with support that helped you endure what would have otherwise broken you. These are not coincidences. They are confirmations that even in silence, God is directing relationships for your good. When God brings the right people, they may not come with a loud announcement. They may not look like what you expected. They may not fit the picture you had in mind. But God uses them as instruments of his grace. Sometimes it is a teacher who sees potential in you that others ignored. Sometimes it is a mentor who speaks a word of direction that keeps you from making a terrible mistake. Sometimes it is a friend who simply sits with you in your pain, their presence reminding you that you are not forgotten. In each of these cases, you may not hear God's voice, but you see his fingerprints in the people he places in your path. There are also times when the people God brings are there for a season rather than a lifetime. Their purpose is to help you take one step forward, to give you strength in a particular moment, or to guide you through a decision. When that season ends, you may wonder why they left, but their impact remains. That too is the silent work of God. He knows who you need and when you need them. He knows what voices will draw you closer to him and what influences would lead you away. So in his silence, he arranges encounters that alter the direction of your life. Think about the stories in Scripture where God worked through relationships. Ruth met Boaz in what seemed like a simple moment of gathering grain in the fields. But God had orchestrated that meeting to secure her future. Jonathan was sent into David's life to encourage him when the weight of calling felt unbearable. And Jonathan's words kept David from giving up. Even the disciples were drawn together by what appeared to be chance. Yet behind the scenes, God was aligning their lives for a greater mission. In every case, people were God's answer in silence. Sometimes the right person comes with correction. They see where you're heading and with love, speak truth that stings but saves you. You may not recognize it immediately, but later you realize that their words rescued you from disaster. Other times, the right person comes with comfort, bringing strength when you had none left. They don't fix the problem, but their encouragement gives you enough courage to stand another day. And often, the right person comes with provision, meeting needs you didn't know how to handle on your own. That provision may be financial, emotional, or spiritual, but it always reminds you that God is aware of your condition. This is why it is so important to be sensitive and grateful when people enter your life. Not every friend is meant to stay forever. Not every relationship is meant to be permanent, but every one of them can carry a divine purpose. God may be silent to your ears, but He is speaking through the hands, the smiles, the advice, and the support of those He sends. You may not realize until years later how pivotal that person was, how crucial that conversation became, or how necessary that connection was to your survival. That is God's silent way of working through people, through relationships, through connections you couldn't have planned yourself. One of the most frustrating seasons in life is when you are forced to wait. You have prayed, you have planned, you have prepared, and yet nothing seems to move. Doors remain shut. Opportunities remain out of reach, and the timeline you imagined keeps stretching further and further. Delays can feel like abandonment. They can feel like wasted time. But what you may not realize is that delays are often the silent classrooms of God, the seasons where He shapes you, matures you, and strengthens you for the very things you've been asking Him for. What feels like a pause is really preparation. So often we want blessings instantly. We want answers immediately. We want breakthroughs without the burden of patience. But God's ways are not our ways, and His timing is never rushed by our urgency. He knows what lies ahead, and He knows the weight of the blessings we are asking Him to deliver. If He were to hand them over too soon, the very thing meant to be a gift could become a burden. And so in His silence, He makes us wait. That waiting is not punishment. It is the process of being shaped into someone who can carry the blessing responsibly. Think about a child who demands to drive a car before they are ready. Giving them the keys too early would not be a blessing, but a curse. They need training. They need maturity. They need experience to handle the responsibility of driving. In the same way, When God makes you wait, He is not withholding out of cruelty. He is ensuring that when the time comes, you will not crash under the weight of what you asked for. His delays are actually His mercy in disguise. When you look at the lives of people in Scripture, delays were always part of their journey. Abraham waited decades before holding the son God promised him. Joseph spent years in prison before stepping into the palace. Moses lived in the wilderness for 40 years before leading Israel out of Egypt. Even Jesus spent 30 years in obscurity before stepping into public ministry. If God allowed His greatest servants to endure seasons of delay, why would we think He would exempt us? The silence of waiting is one of His favorite tools for shaping character. During these delays, God teaches lessons that can't be learned in the fast lane. He builds patience, and patience produces endurance. He builds humility, reminding you that you are dependent on His timing, not your own. He builds trust, showing you that faith is not about instant gratification, but about believing even when nothing changes. These lessons are not wasted. They become the very foundation that holds you steady when the blessing finally comes. Sometimes in the waiting, God is also aligning things you cannot see. He is moving people into position, arranging circumstances, and clearing obstacles that would have blocked your path. You may not realize it while you wait, but when the appointed time comes, everything fits together so perfectly that you know only God could have aligned it. The silence was not inactivity. It was divine coordination. This is why it is dangerous to despise delays. What feels like wasted time is often the most valuable time. What feels like stagnation is actually transformation. The very silence you resent is the space where God is molding you into the person who can walk into the promise without being destroyed by it. So while you wait, don't waste the waiting. Grow in it. Lean into it. Let God shape you in the delay. Because when the silence breaks and the blessing arrives, you will see that the wait was not a denial, but the preparation of your destiny. There are times when you go to God in prayer expecting answers, expecting solutions, expecting a breakthrough that will change everything around you. You cry out for healing, for provision, for direction, and yet heaven seems quiet. The circumstances remain unchanged. The problem still stares you in the face. And you walk away from prayer without the answer you were hoping for. But if you pay close attention, you will notice something happening within you. Even though the outside has not shifted, the inside has been strengthened. The very act of kneeling, of pouring out your heart, of placing your burdens before God has changed you. The silence you thought was neglect was actually God answering in a different way. By fortifying your spirit rather than fixing your situation. Prayer is not just about getting things from God. It is about being shaped by God. Every time you pray, you are connecting your weakness to His strength, your limits to His power, your confusion to His wisdom. And while He may not remove the mountain immediately, He often gives you the strength to climb it. That strength is his silent gift. You may not hear words from heaven, but you feel the courage rising in your heart to face what you thought you could endure. You may not see the miracle yet, but you discover endurance you didn't know you had. That is God helping you in silence. There are moments when prayer feels like a wrestling match. You go before God heavy, overwhelmed, maybe even broken. You groan, you weep, you pour out frustrations that words can barely contain. And in that raw honesty, something happens. Your perspective shifts. Your heart grows lighter. The load you carried so heavily feels shared, because in prayer, you are not just speaking into the air. You are releasing it into the hands of the one who can bear what you cannot. That transfer of weight doesn't always change the problem, but it always changes you. You walk away with more faith, more patience, more hope than when you first knelt. Think of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He prayed in agony, asking if the cup of suffering could pass from him. Heaven was silent. No rescue came. Yet in that silence, his spirit was strengthened. He rose from prayer not with a changed circumstance, but with the power to endure the cross. That is what prayer does. When God does not change the situation, he changes you in the situation. He equips you to carry what once felt unbearable. Many times, people underestimate the power of those silent prayers. The prayers that don't seem to produce immediate results. But those are the prayers that build your spiritual muscles. Those are the prayers that develop resilience, trust, and intimacy with God. Every tear shed in prayer waters the soil of your faith. Every groan in prayer deepens your roots in his presence. You may not see the fruit right away, but the strength you gain in prayer is evidence that God is working even when he is not speaking. And here's the mystery. Sometimes the very answer to prayer is the act of praying itself, the communion, the closeness, the surrender. Those moments transform you in ways you don't even recognize until later. What you thought was silence was God speaking through his strengthening presence. He doesn't always calm the storm on the outside, but he calms the storm on the inside. He doesn't always remove the burden, but he gives you shoulders broad enough to carry it. He doesn't always deliver you out of the fire, but he gives you the power to walk through it without being consumed. So when you kneel in prayer and rise with no outward change, don't dismiss it. Pay attention to the strength in your spirit, to the peace in your heart, to the courage that wasn't there before. That is God answering in silence. That is his way of reminding you that prayer is not wasted, because every time you pray, something inside of you is made stronger. Life has a way of revealing God's work in hindsight. So often when you are in the middle of a storm, all you can feel is the weight of the wind and the sting of the rain. In the moment, it feels unbearable, and you wonder if you will make it through. You cry out for help, and sometimes heaven feels silent. You wonder where God is, why he hasn't stepped in, why he hasn't removed the pain. But then time passes, the storm clears, and you look back. Suddenly, you see that what should have destroyed you did not. You realize that the nights you thought would break you somehow gave way to mornings filled with new strength. You remember the tears that fell like rivers, but you also see how joy returned when you thought it never could. That is when it dawns on you. You were not walking alone. You were being carried. Looking back reveals the footprints of God. You survived situations you had no strength to endure on your own. You came through financial struggles that should have buried you, heartbreaks that should have crushed you, losses that should have left you hopeless. Yet here you are, standing. That survival is not a coincidence. It is the evidence of God's silent work, the proof that even when he did not speak, he was carrying you step by step. His silence was not neglect. It was his quiet strength holding you when you couldn't hold yourself. Sometimes you don't realize you are being carried until the crisis is over. In the middle of pain, your emotions blind you to God's presence. You feel abandoned. You feel forgotten. You feel like your prayers are bouncing off the ceiling. But when you look back, you realize that the only reason you didn't collapse was because he was carrying you. That accident that should have taken your life but didn't. That sickness that should have ended your story but didn't. That mistake that should have ruined your future but didn't. Each one is proof that God was silently sustaining you. Think of the children of Israel. When they walked through the wilderness, they complained, they doubted, they thought God had left them. But when Moses reminded them later, he pointed out that their clothes never wore out. Their feet did not swell, and manna fell from heaven every single day. They were being carried even when they couldn't see it. Looking back, they could see God's hand in the details they had taken for granted. In the same way, when you look back over your life, you see things you once overlooked. You see how God made a way when there was no way. You see how he sent strength in moments you thought would finish you. You see how his grace kept you when you weren't even aware of it. There are moments you can't explain any other way. You didn't have the resources, but somehow the bill was paid. You didn't have the strength, but somehow you got out of bed and faced another day. You didn't have the wisdom, but somehow you made the right decision that changed everything. These are not accidents. These are signs of a God who carried you silently, gently, faithfully. He doesn't always announce his help. He doesn't always make it obvious in the moment. But when you reflect, you can't deny that his hand was under you the entire time. Looking back with honest eyes will silence your doubts. It will remind you that if God carried you then, he is carrying you now. What you thought was silence was actually the sound of his footsteps holding you close. And the proof is in your survival. You didn't get here by luck. You didn't get here by chance. You didn't get here on your own. You got here because when you were too weak to walk, God picked you up and carried you through. There are times when you open the Bible and read it like any other book. The words are familiar. The verses are ones you've seen before, and you move on without much thought. But then there are moments, especially in seasons when God feels silent, when a verse leaps off the page and pierces your heart like an arrow. Suddenly the same words you've skimmed over countless times feel alive, relevant, and personal. It feels as if the passage was written specifically for you in that exact moment. That is no accident. That is God speaking in silence. He may not thunder from the sky, but he whispers through his word. When Scripture comes alive like that, it is a sign that God is not only near, but actively guiding you. You may not have heard a voice in prayer. You may not have received the answer you were seeking. But through his word, he is sending you comfort, direction, or correction. It is his way of letting you know that even though he seems quiet, he has not left you without guidance. The Bible becomes more than ink on paper. It becomes a living conversation between heaven and your heart. There have been countless testimonies of people who felt lost, discouraged, or ready to give up. And in their quiet time, they stumbled across a verse that revived them. Maybe they were anxious and read, "Cast all your cares on him, for he cares for you." And suddenly their heart was lifted. Maybe they were grieving and read, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted." And suddenly the tears felt lighter. Maybe they were fearful and read, "Fear not, for I am with you." And suddenly courage returned. That is not coincidence. That is God aligning his word with your moment. The beauty of God's word is that it has layers. You can read the same passage 100 times and find something new each time. That is because his Spirit breathes life into it according to your season. In one stage of life, a verse might mean one thing, and years later it might mean something deeper. The silence of God is often filled with these subtle revelations. You may not hear him in the way you expect, but if you open the Bible with a listening heart, you will discover that he is speaking all along. Think about how Jesus used Scripture, even in his own silent trials. In the wilderness, when tempted, he didn't receive a dramatic rescue. He didn't call for angels to shout down the devil. Instead, he used the word. It is written. Even in silence, the word was his weapon and his comfort. In the same way, when your life feels quiet and you don't know what to do, the word becomes your strength. God may not speak audibly, but he speaks powerfully through verses that come alive in your spirit. Sometimes the word comes alive when you need guidance. You are wrestling with a decision, unsure of which path to take. And suddenly a passage clarifies what to do. Other times the word comes alive as reassurance. You feel forgotten. And then you read a promise that reminds you God will never leave or forsake you. And sometimes the word comes alive as correction. You are drifting off course, and suddenly a scripture convicts you, pulling you back into alignment with God's will. Each time, it is proof that silence does not mean absence. God is still speaking through his written voice. This is why it is so vital not to neglect the word, especially in silent seasons. It is easy to think that since God isn't answering, you should stop seeking. But the truth is, the word is often the very place where his answers are hidden. The verse that shifts everything could be waiting for you in today's reading. The encouragement that keeps you going another day could be sitting on the page you are about to turn. When the word comes alive, it reminds you that God is closer than you think, and his silence is not the absence of his voice. It is the invitation to hear him more deeply through the scriptures he has already given you. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something today. When the favor of God rests on a woman, it shows up. It cannot be hidden. It cannot be silenced. It cannot be denied. Favor is not about fortune or fame. It's about divine fingerprints on your life that set you apart for purpose, protection, and power. And today I want to give you 7 unmistakable signs that you are a woman favored by God. When a woman is favored by God, one of the first things you'll notice is her unshakable peace in the midst of chaos. It's not ordinary peace. It's divine peace. It's the kind of peace that doesn't make sense to the world, the kind that defies logic. She could be walking through a storm, surrounded by confusion, disappointment, and unexpected trials, but there's a calm about her that stands out. Not because life is perfect, but because her trust is rooted in something greater than circumstances. He has anchored her soul in the promises of God, and that anchor holds firm when the winds start blowing. You see, a favored woman doesn't crumble when things get hard. She doesn't panic when plans fall apart. Her peace isn't determined by what's happening around her. It flows from who's dwelling within her. She knows that God is not only in control, he is with her. So instead of reacting in fear, she responds in faith. Her spirit remains steady because she knows the one who commands the storm is also the one who walks with her through it. People look at her and wonder how she keeps it together. They whisper, "If I were her, I would have lost my mind." What they don't know is she's been in the secret place. She's been on her knees when no one was watching. She's cried tears in the midnight hour and poured out her soul before the Lord. And in that private place, she received something money can't buy and people can't give. Peace that surpasses all understanding. This kind of peace can't be faked. You can wear the right clothes, smile the right smile, say the right words, but if the inside is in turmoil, eventually the cracks will show. But when peace is planted deep within your spirit by the Holy Spirit himself, it becomes a part of your very identity. It's not performance, it's presence. The presence of God that guards your heart and mind like a shield. A favored woman walks into a room where everyone is anxious, and her presence alone shifts the atmosphere. She's not loud about it. She doesn't have to announce it, but peace radiates from her. She becomes a living testimony that faith still works, that God still gives rest to the weary, and that chaos doesn't have to control you. When others are losing their grip, she's holding on to God's promises, knowing he never fails. It doesn't mean she never feels fear or frustration. It means she refuses to be led by them. She feels the emotions but doesn't live in them. Instead, she chooses to abide in the truth of who God is. And because of that, her life becomes a light to others. She becomes the example, the encouragement, the proof that you can go through the fire and come out without the smoke. That kind of peace comes from knowing that even when you don't understand the plan, you trust the planner. Even when the road is unclear, you know the one who orders your steps. And because of that, you can walk through dark valleys with your head high. You can face uncertainty with confidence. You can endure loss without losing hope. It's a supernatural peace, born from relationship, not religion. It's cultivated in quiet moments with God, grown through seasons of waiting, and revealed in times of testing. A woman favored by God doesn't have to fight to prove her strength. Her peace is her strength. She stands not because life is easy, but because her faith is strong. And when life gets loud, she listens for the still, small voice that reminds her, I am with you. Be still and know. That's how you know a woman is favored. She's not just surviving, she's standing, smiling, and shining right in the middle of the storm. When a woman is favored by God, doors begin to open that she didn't even knock on. Things begin to align in ways she couldn't plan, predict, or prepare for. It's as if heaven has gone before her and made the crooked path straight. She doesn't have to chase opportunities. Opportunities begin to chase her. People begin to notice her without her trying to be seen. She's called into rooms she didn't campaign for. That's the power of divine favor. It breaks the rules of logic and operates on the authority of heaven. You see, when God's favor is on a woman, it's not about her resume, her credentials, or her connections. It's about his purpose and his timing. God doesn't need permission from anyone to promote you. He doesn't need a board meeting to bless you. He can take you from the background to the spotlight without ever asking for man's opinion. That's how you know it's favor and not ambition. Favor will take you where hustle can't. That's what happened with Ruth. She was just gleaning in the field, doing the humble, quiet work. But favor positioned her in Boaz's sight. She didn't have to chase a man. She chased obedience. And favor brought everything else into alignment. That's what happens when you walk in purpose. You don't have to chase after things. You position yourself for things to find you. Now understand this. Favor doesn't mean you won't have to work. It doesn't mean you get to sit back and do nothing. But it does mean the work you do is anointed. It's empowered. It produces fruit beyond your ability. You might plant the seed, but God brings the rain. You might show up to the meeting, but God opens the heart of the decision maker. You might write the vision, but God puts it in the hands of someone who can carry it to the next level. That's why a favored woman doesn't walk around in desperation. She doesn't force what isn't flowing. She trusts the timing of God and moves in step with his spirit. Because what's for her will always find her. When she walks through a door, she knows it's not by her own doing, it's by the hand of God. And because of that, she walks in with humility, not arrogance, confidence, not conceit, gratitude, not entitled. Others may wonder how she got there. They may try to copy the formula, duplicate the steps, recreate the moment. But they don't realize, this wasn't about strategy, it was about divine assignment. It was favor. And favor can't be explained. It can only be recognized. It carries a fragrance, a weight, a mark. When a woman is favored, people may not always like her, but they can't ignore her. Because what God opens, no one can shut. And when He elevates you, no one can pull you down. If you find yourself walking into places you never thought you'd be, don't apologize for it. Don't shrink back. Don't second guess yourself. Just remember, you didn't open the door, God did, and if He opened it, He intends for you to walk through it boldly, fully aware that you are standing on holy ground, not because of who you are, but because of who sent. When a woman is favored by God, she may be attacked, but she will not be defeated. In fact, one of the clearest signs of divine favor is that trouble comes looking for you, but it can't take you out. The attacks may come in waves. The pressure may feel overwhelming, the criticism may sting, and the betrayal may cut deep. But through it all, you still rise. That's not luck. That's not resilience alone. That's divine protection wrapped in favor. See, favor doesn't exempt you from adversity. It equips you to overcome it. Many people think that being favored means life will be smooth, problems will disappear, and everyone will cheer you on. But that's not how it works. In fact, favor often attracts resistance. When the enemy sees the hand of God on your life, he takes it personally. He doesn't fight what's not a threat. So the attacks are not a sign that you're doing something wrong. They're confirmation that you're carrying something right. Look at the life of Joseph. He was favored by his father and favored by God. But that favor didn't keep him from being thrown into a pit. It didn't stop him from being sold into slavery. It didn't protect him from being falsely accused or forgotten in prison. But at every stage, God was with him. And every attack became a stepping stone. What looked like a setback was really a setup for his elevation. That's what favor does. It turns every weapon formed against you into fuel for your future. When you're a woman favored by God, the enemy will try to use people, circumstances, and even your own thoughts to break you. He'll whisper lies. You're not good enough. You're alone. You're finished. But the truth of God overpowers the lies of the enemy. His word says, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. It doesn't say the weapons won't form. It says they won't win. And when God says it, you can count on it. There's a kind of strength that only comes through struggle. There's a kind of authority you don't get in comfort. You get it in the fire. And a favored woman understands this. She doesn't panic when adversity hits. She may cry, she may stumble, but she doesn't quit. Because she knows that what's on her life is bigger than what's coming against her. She walks with the awareness that if God allowed it, He has already made a way through. People around her may wonder how she keeps standing. They've seen the pain, the losses, the disappointments, but somehow she keeps showing up, keeps praising, keeps believing. That's favor. It sustains you when strength runs out. It lifts you when life tries to bury you. It reminds you that your story is not over. It's just being written with divine interruptions. And even when it feels like you're surrounded, you are actually covered. You are protected by angels you can't see, shielded by grace you didn't earn, upheld by promises that cannot fail. A favored woman walks through warfare with a quiet confidence, not because she trusts herself, but because she trusts the God who goes before her. She knows who fights her battles. She knows who holds her future. And because of that, she may be pressed, but not crushed. She may be struck down, but she is never discouraged. So when the attacks come, and they will, she doesn't lose her mind. She lifts her eyes, she draws her sword, she calls on heaven, because she understands something the enemy hates. You can attack her, but you can't stop her. You can lie on her, but you can't bury her. You can delay her, but you can't deny her. Because when God favors a woman, her destiny is not in man's hands. It's in his. And that means the outcome is already secured. When a woman is favored by God, there's a wisdom that rests on her that defies age, experience, and education. She walks in a level of discernment that others can't quite explain. She sees beyond what's in front of her. She hears beyond what's being said. She senses shifts in the spirit even before the natural world catches up. That's not intuition. That's not just a good gut feeling. That's divine insight. Supernatural wisdom granted by God himself. This wisdom is not loud. It's not flashy. It doesn't have to prove itself. It's quiet strength. It's calm understanding. It's being in the room and seeing what others miss. It's the ability to hear between the lines, to see behind the smiles, and to know when to speak and when to stay silent. A favored woman doesn't always have to say a lot, but when she does, people listen. Because there's weight behind her words, not just information, but revelation. This kind of wisdom isn't learned in a classroom. It's developed in communion with God. It's birthed in prayer, shaped in stillness, and sharpened through obedience. It comes from a heart that listens to the whispers of the Holy Spirit, not just the noise of culture. And because she listens, God entrusts her with insight. He reveals things to her that others can't see because her spirit is open, her heart is humble, and her ears are tuned to heaven. Favor will have you walking in rooms where everyone has the qualifications, but you have the clarity. You may not have the title, but you have the truth. You may not have the degrees, but you have divine direction. That's what sets you apart. That's why people seek your counsel. That's why others come to you with their confusion, because there's a knowing in you that comes from your connection with God. And this wisdom isn't just for public moments. It shows up in private decisions, in knowing who to trust and who to distance yourself from. in choosing when to wait and when to move, in understanding what looks good but isn't God. A favored woman knows how to discern timing. She knows that delayed doesn't mean denied. She's not easily swayed by emotion or trends because her spirit has been trained to recognize truth from distraction. This kind of wisdom is protection. It keeps her from falling into traps set by the enemy. It allows her to navigate relationships, leadership, motherhood, ministry, and business with grace and strategy. She doesn't have to fight for every inch. She flows in alignment. And when she doesn't know what to do, she doesn't panic, she prays. Because she knows the God who gives wisdom freely to those who ask. People may wonder how she always seems to just know. How she avoids pitfalls, how she stays grounded. It's not luck, it's not guessing, it's favor. Favor that gave her eyes to see what others overlook. Favor that teaches her to lean not on her own understanding, but in all her ways to acknowledge Him, and He directs her path. This woman doesn't chase attention, she chases clarity. She doesn't need to be the loudest voice in the room. Her wisdom speaks for her. She doesn't need validation from people because she's already received revelation from God. And when she moves with purpose. Her steps are ordered, her words are seasoned. Her presence is powerful, not because of who she is, but because of who she listens to. That's the sign of a favored woman. Her wisdom speaks before she does. Her discernment leads her before decisions are made. And her intimacy with God gives her insight that no human could ever provide. That kind of wisdom, heavenly wisdom, is a sure sign of divine favor. When a woman is favored by God, she doesn't just rise, she lifts others with her. She's not threatened by someone else's glow because she knows her light comes from the source that never runs out. She doesn't compete, she completes. She encourages, she uplifts, she mentors. She pours out what's been poured into her, and she does it without fear of losing herself in the process. Because a favored woman understands something most people miss. Helping others shine doesn't make her dim. It makes her brighter. In a world that teaches self-promotion, self-protection, and self-preservation, a woman favored by God lives by a different code. She knows that kingdom favor is not selfish, it's shared. She's secure in who she is and who she is, so she has no need to compare, no need to envy, no need to undermine anyone else's success. She knows that what God has for her is for her, and no one else can take it. That's why she can clap for others with a full heart. That's why she can speak life into someone else's dream without questioning her own. She sees other women not as competition, but as sisters, as co-laborers in purpose, as allies in a divine mission. She can walk into a room full of strong women and not shrink, not puff up, but stand in grace and unity. She can give a compliment without a hidden agenda. She can celebrate without keeping score. And when someone else wins, she doesn't feel smaller. She feels inspired because favor gives her the perspective to know that God blessing someone else doesn't mean he's forgotten about her. A woman favored by God invests in others. She'll take the time to teach what she's learned, to share her story, to offer wisdom, support, and truth. She doesn't hoard information or guard her success like a secret. She knows that part of her favor is meant to overflow, that she's been blessed to be a blessing, that the oil on her life isn't just for her, it's for every person she's assigned to influence, encourage, and pour into. But here's what makes her truly powerful. She does all of this without losing her own voice, without losing her own identity. She doesn't shrink so others can feel tall, and she doesn't boast to make others feel small. She simply walks in the fullness of who God created her to be. And that authenticity gives permission to others to do the same. Her life becomes a living message. You can be strong, you can be kind, you can be favored, and you can still serve. And make no mistake, favor doesn't make her naive. She's wise. She discerns who is truly meant to walk with her. She knows when to give and when to guard. But even when people misuse her kindness, her favor keeps her from becoming bitter. She may pull back, but she doesn't shut down. She may cry, but she doesn't stop giving. Because she knows her source is God, not people. And as long as he keeps filling her, she'll keep pouring. This kind of woman becomes a legacy builder. She's not just living for herself. She's impacting generations. She raises daughters who know their worth. She empowers friends to rise higher. She covers others in prayer. And she uses her platform, whatever size it may be, to speak life and truth. She doesn't need a stage to make a difference. Wherever she is, she shows up with love, with strength, and with the ability to leave people better than she found them. That's favored. Not just when God blesses you, but when others are blessed through you. When your life becomes a conduit of grace, not a container. When you realize that lifting others doesn't lower your value, it confirms it. Because a woman who's favored by God understands that her crown is secure, and she doesn't need to dim another light to shine. When a woman is favored by God, she carries herself with a quiet confidence that cannot be explained by natural means. It's not arrogance, it's not ego, it's not about titles, appearance, or status. It's the deep, unshakable knowing that she is chosen, covered, and called. She doesn't have to announce who she is. Her presence testifies. She walks into a room and the atmosphere shifts, not because she demands attention, but because the weight of God's glory rests on her. She knows she is loved. She knows she is purposed. And because of that, she walks with a holy boldness. This confidence doesn't come from a perfect past. In fact, most favored women have walked through brokenness, shame, rejection, and delay. But those things didn't disqualify them. They refined them. Because a woman who's been through the fire and still stands knows exactly who kept her. And that knowledge changes how she moves. She no longer seeks approval from people when she already has acceptance from heaven. She doesn't have to fit into man-made boxes. When God has already expanded her territory. Her confidence is rooted in identity. She knows she's a daughter of the King. She's not trying to earn her place. She's already seated in heavenly places. She's not hustling for validation. She's moving from a place of victory. She knows that her worth was settled at the cross, so no compliment can inflate her, and no criticism can deflate her. She's grounded, anchored, and steady, because her confidence flows from the one who never changes. And let me tell you, this kind of confidence is rare. The world teaches women to be confident in the wrong things: beauty, success, attention, influence. But those things fade. They shift. They can be taken away. A woman favored by God doesn't build her self-worth on temporary things. She builds it on the unshakable truth of who God is and who she is in him. So whether she's in a palace or in the wilderness, she still holds her head high, not because the place is good, but because God is good. She doesn't compare herself to others because she understands that her lane is uniquely crafted. What God is doing in her life doesn't need to look like anyone else's. She's content with her process. She's patient with her progress. She's not trying to rush the hand of God because she knows that when he moves, it will be right on time. Her confidence allows her to rest, even in the waiting. She's not frantic, she's focused. This kind of woman is powerful because she doesn't let insecurity drive her. She doesn't second guess every step. She prays, she listens, and she moves when God says move. And when opposition comes, and it will, she doesn't cower. She stands. She doesn't retreat in fear. She advances in faith because she knows who's backing her. She's not out here walking alone. She's walking with the full force of heaven behind her. That's why people are drawn to her. They may not be able to articulate it, but there's something about her that stands out. It's the light in her eyes, the strength in her voice, the grace in her demeanor. It's not just personality, it's presence. The presence of God radiating through her life, making it clear that she's not just confident, she's called. It's not to mean she's perfect. She still has moments of doubt. She still fights fear. But the difference is she doesn't live there. She doesn't build her identity on those moments. She brings them to God, and he reminds her again who she is. And once she's reminded, she steps back out into the world with her shoulders squared, her spirit strong, and her faith leading the way. That's the confidence of a woman favored by God, quiet, steady, unstoppable. She doesn't have to prove anything, she just lives it. Boldly, humbly, authentically, because she knows that being chosen by God is the greatest affirmation she could ever receive. When a woman is favored by God, his peace guards her in ways that defy understanding. In the middle of storms, while others are panicking, she remains steady. Not because she's numb, not because she's blind to reality, but because there's an inner calm flowing from her connection to the Prince of Peace. She doesn't rely on external conditions to feel secure. Her anchor is internal. She carries a peace that doesn't make sense to the world because it doesn't come from the world. It comes from above. This peace is not the absence of trouble, it's the presence of God in the trouble. It's knowing that even when life gets loud, her spirit doesn't have to. It's being able to rest when things are unclear. It's choosing trust over anxiety, worship over worry, prayer over panic. A favored woman has learned how to bring everything to God. Not just the big decisions, but the quiet fears that creep in at night. The silent battles that no one else sees. She lays them at his feet and walks away lighter. Not because the problem disappeared, but because she knows who's holding it now. People around her might not understand how she keeps it together. They see the pressure she's under. They hear the challenges she's facing. They expect her to break, to snap, to spiral. But instead, they see her praying. They see her showing up. They see her smiling through tears and speaking hope when most would crumble. That's the favor of God, protecting her mind, guarding her emotions, and preserving her spirit. Peace is not passive. It's powerful. It's warfare. Because the enemy's number one tactic is confusion, chaos, and fear. But a woman who walks in God's peace has a shield around her that the enemy can't penetrate. She may be surrounded by noise, but her soul is quiet. She may be attacked on every side, but her heart remains fixed. That kind of peace comes from intimacy. It comes from staying close to the Father, from knowing his voice and trusting his promises. This peace shows up in her decisions. She doesn't rush. She doesn't force. She waits until she feels that release in her spirit. She's learned that just because something looks good doesn't mean it's God. So she listens for the peace that confirms the path. If it doesn't align with his peace, she won't move, because she knows the difference between a good opportunity and a God-ordained one. And even in relationships, peace is her compass. She's not drawn to drama. She doesn't entertain confusion. She values clarity, honesty, and alignment. If being connected to someone disturbs her peace, she pays attention. That's favor. Being able to discern what's pulling you away from the stillness that God gave you. A favorite woman protects her peace like a treasure, because she understands it took time, healing, and deep trust in God to get to that place. And she's not letting anything or anyone rob her of it. This peace makes her powerful in rooms of chaos. While others react, she responds. While others worry, she waits. She's not easily shaken. She doesn't lose her footing when things fall apart, because her foundation is not built on circumstances, it's built on Christ. And when the storm passes, people look at her and wonder how she made it through, but she knows she made it because she was held by peace, sustained by peace, surrounded by peace. That's what favor looks like. Not just blessings in the bank or applause from a crowd, but peace in the midnight hour, peace when the future is unclear, peace when everything should be falling apart but somehow isn't. That's the signature of God on a woman's life. When chaos breaks out around her, but calm rises within her, because she knows her life is in the hands of the one who never fails. Let me tell you something right now. When God places his divine hand over a woman's life, there is no weapon, no enemy and no scheme of the devil that can destroy her. See, when heaven declares protection over you, hell can't penetrate it. Now today, I want to walk you through 8 signs that show a woman is protected by God from evil people. If you recognize these signs in your life, rejoice, because it means your steps are being ordered. You're not walking alone. You're walking under divine security. There are some things in life you can't learn from a book, a sermon, or even experience. They've got to be revealed by the Spirit of God. One of the clearest signs that a woman is protected by God is that she sees things other people don't see. She notices the shift in a conversation. She feels the weight in a room. She senses the danger before the storm ever rolls in. And it's not because she's suspicious, paranoid, or insecure. No, it's because the Holy Spirit has given her discernment that goes beyond what she's lived through. Now understand this. Discernment isn't the same as knowledge. Knowledge comes from study. Experience comes from time. But discernment, that comes from the Lord. You can't manufacture it. You can't force it. You can't fake it. Discernment is a gift, and when God gives it, it acts like a divine alarm system inside your soul. It starts going off when evil tries to dress up like good. It starts beeping when people show up with smiles but have swords in their hearts. A woman with godly discernment can pick up on things before they manifest. She doesn't always have the proof in her hands, but she's got peace in her spirit. And that peace comes from knowing what the Lord has revealed to her, not what man has said. You can be in a room full of people and think everything looks right on the surface, but something in her will say, this ain't it. Something will pull at her, urging her not to say yes too quickly, not to jump into a situation too fast. And if she listens to that voice, if she doesn't override the Spirit, she'll avoid a whole lot of heartbreak, betrayal, and spiritual traps. Because discernment is protection in disguise. It's God speaking in a whisper when the world is screaming at full volume. Now, here's what makes discernment so powerful. It doesn't need history to work. It works ahead of time. That means she can walk into a relationship with someone she just met, and something in her will say, they're not who they say they are. She can sit in a church and hear a message that sounds good on the surface, but the Spirit in her says, that's not truth. That's manipulation. That's the Spirit of God giving her insight, not just into actions, but into motives. See, the enemy loves to use charm. He loves to use smooth words and good appearances. But discernment cuts through the image and sees the spirit behind the person. Discernment doesn't care about resumes, reputations, or what everybody else thinks. It sees what heaven sees, and more importantly, It hears what God says. And let me tell you something. That's why the devil hates a discerning woman. He can't fool her. He can't bait her with fake opportunities or toxic people dressed in designer clothes. He can't catch her slipping because her spirit is awake and her ear is tuned to the frequency of heaven. Even when her emotions want to say yes, her spirit will say no. Even when her loneliness tries to lead her into compromise, her discernment will say, this isn't love. This is a trap. She might not always have a long list of explanations. She may not be able to convince everybody around her why she said no to that job, that friend, that church, or that man. But she doesn't need their agreement when she has God's clarity. And when it's all said and done, when the truth finally comes out, people look back and say, how did you know? And she just smiles because she knows the answer God told me. Not through a loud voice or a lightning bolt, but through that still, small whisper that said, watch out. That's protection. That's covering. That's God's shield in operation. When discernment kicks in, it means God is on post, guarding her steps before she even takes them. That's why she's still standing. That's why she didn't fall for the setup. That's why what was meant to destroy her never even got close. One of the most misunderstood signs of God's protection in a woman's life is the loss of people. We tend to think that protection always looks like addition. More friends, more allies, more favor. But sometimes divine protection looks like subtraction. It looks like people walking away. It looks like silence where there used to be noise. It looks like unanswered calls, changed behavior, and relationships that used to be sweet turning suddenly sour. But here's what most people miss. That shift wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. Because when God is protecting a woman, He will remove anyone whose presence is a threat to her purpose. God is not just the God who opens doors. He's also the God who closes them. And when you are covered by Him, He's not just watching your steps. He's watching who's walking with you. He's examining every connection, every friendship, every partnership. And if someone is plotting while pretending, if someone is draining her while smiling at her, if someone is speaking peace to her face, but poison behind her back, God will cut it off. He won't always ask for her permission. He won't always send a warning. Sometimes He'll just move. Now, when it first happens, it hurts. Don't think that a protected woman never feels the sting of separation. She does. She's human. It confuses her. Why did they switch up? What did I do wrong? She replays the conversations, tries to hold on, maybe even tries to fix what's broken. But no matter how hard she tries, the connection keeps unraveling. because God never meant for her to fix what he allowed to fall apart. You've got to understand that when God is truly for you, he will allow some relationships to end so your destiny can begin. Some people were only assigned to your life for a season. And when the season shifts, so must they. The same people who were once part of your development might become a threat to your deliverance. So God, in his mercy, lets the exit happen. And if you look closely, you'll see what comes next isn't chaos, it's peace. That's the part people don't talk about enough. The peace that follows the departure, the strange sense of rest, the clarity that rises when the noise is gone, the emotional pressure that lifts. That is not coincidence. That is confirmation. Confirmation that God just cleared the path. Confirmation that he just removed a distraction or a danger you couldn't fully see. The gift of peace is how God affirms that what was taken wasn't necessary for the next level. You see, when a woman is protected by God, she might lose people, but she never loses what's meant for her. She might lose the call, the friendship, the approval, but she keeps her identity, her peace, her mission. That's why peace is one of the loudest signs that God is in control. The presence of peace after the loss is heaven's way of saying, you didn't need them. You needed me. And sometimes the peace doesn't come just because of who left. It comes because of what didn't come with them. The drama didn't follow. The confusion didn't linger. The anxiety didn't stay. Because God didn't just remove a person. He removed a spirit. He removed the weight. He removed the tension. And suddenly you feel lighter. That's what divine protection feels like. Not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as finally breathing again. So the next time someone leaves without explanation, the next time you're unfriended, overlooked, or misunderstood, don't panic. Don't chase what God dismissed. Just stop, breathe, and take note. Is there peace now? Is there rest? If the answer is yes, then you didn't lose. You gained. You didn't just lose people. You gained protection. You gained peace. And that is more valuable than the approval of the crowd. There's something powerful about a woman who knows she's protected by God. She doesn't move like everybody else. She doesn't walk with her head down. She doesn't tremble when the enemy threatens. She walks with a quiet boldness, a steady confidence, a calm assurance. Not because she thinks she's invincible, but because she knows who is walking with her. She's not arrogant. She's anchored. And when your confidence is anchored in God, fear loses its grip. Now, don't get it twisted. Confidence doesn't mean the absence of struggle. It doesn't mean she hasn't been through things. In fact, the most confident women have walked through deep waters, survived dark seasons, and endured fierce attacks. But they learned something in those battles. God didn't leave them. He never abandoned them. He didn't let the fire consume them. So now, she walks like she's covered because she is. See, when fear knocks at the door, she doesn't open it with anxiety. She answers it with faith. She might feel the weight of uncertainty, but she doesn't bow to it. Why? Because fear is a liar and confidence is her weapon. God didn't give her a spirit of fear. He gave her power, love, and a sound mind. And when you walk in that truth, you don't flinch when the enemy raises his voice. You don't back down when people turn their backs. You don't crumble under pressure because you know who holds your future. There is a peace that comes from knowing you are divinely protected. It's not loud. It's not showy. It's that inner calm that lets you walk through storms with your head held high. It's that spiritual backbone that lets you say, even if everything around me falls apart, I will not be shaken. That kind of woman doesn't need approval to feel secure. She doesn't need to be seen to feel valuable. She walks with her head up because she knows she's a daughter of the King. And daughters of the King don't fear threats from the enemy. They stand firm and declare the promises of God. This kind of confidence intimidates evil people because they expect her to be insecure. They want her to doubt herself. They hope she stays silent, unsure, timid. But she doesn't. She speaks when God gives her the word. She moves when he says move. She waits when he says wait. And every step is grounded in trust. Not in herself, but in the God who sees all, knows all, and defends her behind closed doors. Confidence doesn't mean she has all the answers. It means she knows where to go when she needs them. It means she doesn't panic when plans fall apart. She doesn't lose herself trying to impress or persuade people. She's steady because her identity is rooted in something unshakable. And when your identity is in Christ, people can't define you, threats can't move you, and fear can't rule you. That's why she doesn't run from challenges. She faces them. She doesn't shrink back when life gets loud. She gets quiet, listens for the voice of God, and moves in obedience. There's no need to rush. No need to compete. No need to please everyone. She's walking in alignment, not anxiety. Because confidence doesn't come from control. It comes from surrender. And when you've surrendered your life to God, you no longer have to live reacting to everything around you. You move in purpose, not panic. So while others are stressing, comparing, and overthinking, she's walking with confidence. Not because she's never been afraid, but because she knows fear doesn't get the final say. God does. And when he says, I've got you, that's all she needs to keep walking strong, steady, and fearless. because she knows wherever she goes, she's not going alone. When God's protection is on a woman, something incredible happens in the unseen places of her life. Evil can't get a grip on her spirit. People can lie on her, betray her, plot against her, but for some reason, none of it lasts. The dirt thrown at her doesn't stain. The schemes set against her never succeed. The weapons may form, but they never prosper. That's not luck. That's divine insulation. That's the Spirit of God keeping her clean when the world tries to make her dirty. You ever notice how some women are constantly surrounded by drama? Wherever they go, confusion follows. That's not just about personality. That's spiritual. But when a woman is protected by God, there's a purity to her atmosphere. His, not perfection, purity. That means even if evil gets close, it doesn't linger. It might try to attach itself through offense, bitterness, temptation, or gossip, but it slips off her like water off a raincoat because her heart has been guarded by something stronger than good habits. It's been guarded by the presence of God. That kind of woman doesn't entertain mess. She doesn't feed it, spread it, or build her identity around it. Evil can't stick because she doesn't give it room to breathe. The Holy Spirit checks her spirit quickly. When someone tries to pull her into conflict, she discerns it and disengages. When someone tries to bait her into revenge, she chooses silence. When the enemy whispers lies about who she is, she shuts it down with truth. That's why her spirit stays free. Not because she hasn't been tested, but because she's learned how to fight the right way. You see, evil is sticky. It tries to cling to your attitude, your mindset, your emotions. One offense can turn into resentment. One betrayal can turn into a bitterness that poisons your whole perspective. But a protected woman has been covered in such a way that God keeps cleansing her, healing her, and washing her, sometimes without her even knowing it. That's why she doesn't carry what she went through. She doesn't look like what she's been through. She's been through hell. But hell didn't leave its fingerprints on her soul. That's not her strength. That's God's sanctification at work. And what's even more powerful, when people try to bring evil to her, lies, slander, manipulation, it dies in the soil of her spirit. It can't grow. She doesn't water it. She doesn't let it take root. That's because she values her peace more than petty revenge. She guards her joy like it's treasure. And it is. Because she knows that once the enemy robs you of your joy, it's easier for him to control your reactions. Don't misunderstand. She's not naive. She sees the evil. She hears the comments. She feels the shade. But she doesn't carry it home. She doesn't let it define her day. She casts it off, like Scripture says, because she knows evil doesn't belong to her. She was never designed to carry offense, hate, or vengeance. She's too anointed for that. Her calling is too high to get dragged into every argument, every attack, every distraction. When God is shielding your spirit, you don't even have to clap back. You don't have to defend your name. Your integrity speaks louder than gossip. Your fruit speaks louder than lies. And over time, even your enemies will have to admit, nothing they threw at you stuck. Nothing they planned ever worked. Because your spirit was too clean, too guarded, too covered to be contaminated. That's the kind of protection only God can give. Evil might knock, but it doesn't get to stay. Darkness might try to creep in, but it runs into light. Because when the Spirit of God dwells in a woman, she becomes untouchable, not in her flesh, but in her spirit. And no matter what happens around her, what's inside her stays pure. When a woman is protected by God, one of the clearest signs isn't just who leaves her life, but who enters it and when. God doesn't let his daughters walk through life uncovered. Even when they feel alone, heaven is moving people into position. They might not always look like what she expects. They might not show up when she wants them. But they arrive on time, every time. That's because divine protection doesn't only remove what's harmful, it places what's helpful. And the people God assigns to a protected woman aren't just companions, they're coverings. She doesn't have to beg for support. She doesn't have to chase validation. God sends the right people with the right spirit for the right season. Not people who compete, but people who complement. Not people who drain her, but people who build her. These are encouragers who speak life into her purpose when she feels tired. These are intercessors who pray for her when she doesn't even have the words. These are wise voices who don't just tell her what she wants to hear. They tell her what she needs to hear because they're led by the Spirit, not ego. You see, when you're truly walking with God, he doesn't just order your steps. He orders your relationships. He aligns hearts. He orchestrates divine appointments. That one person who randomly checked in on her, that wasn't random. That sister who came into her life during the most broken chapter of her story, that wasn't coincidence. That mentor who spoke a word that shifted her whole perspective, that was strategy. God uses people to shield his daughters, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Because the enemy doesn't always attack head-on. Sometimes he uses isolation. He wants her alone in her mind. He wants her feeling like no one understands. But God steps in and interrupts the silence. He sends someone with a word in season, someone to remind her, you're not crazy. You're not alone. You're not going under. That kind of support doesn't come from popularity. It comes from divine placement. And let's be clear, not everybody around her is a protector. That's why discernment is key. Just because someone is close doesn't mean they're sent. But when God sends someone, their presence brings peace. Their words carry weight. Their actions reflect heaven. They don't just want access to her life. They want alignment with her purpose. And that's the difference between a distraction and a divine connection. God's timing is perfect. Maybe she was about to give up, and then a voice called her out of it. Maybe she was carrying pain in secret, and someone came alongside her and said, "I see you." Maybe she didn't even pray for help, but God sent it anyway. That's divine backup. That's covenant friendship. That's heavenly strategy working behind the scenes. She's not out here trying to build a circle. God is building it for her, one obedient person at a time. And here's what's beautiful. She doesn't have to manipulate it, force it, or pretend to be something she's not to keep them. When it's from God, the connection sustains itself. Even if they don't talk every day, the bond stays strong. Even if the seasons change, the love doesn't. Because God didn't send them to flatter her. He sent them to fortify her. That's how you know she's covered. That's how you know she's protected. Her tribe may be small, but it's strategic. She may not always know who to trust, but God keeps revealing who's for her. And those divine relationships become part of her armor, strengthening her when life tries to break her, surrounding her when the enemy tries to isolate her, and reminding her that heaven is always one step ahead. There's something about a woman who won't break under pressure that makes the enemy nervous. She's been through the fire, but you wouldn't know it by looking at her. She's faced battles that should have buried her, cried tears no one ever saw, endured betrayals that would have broken others. But somehow, she's still standing. That kind of strength doesn't come from the flesh. That's not willpower. That's divine empowerment. When a woman is protected by God, He doesn't just shield her from danger. He fills her with strength that defies logic. It's the kind of strength that doesn't show up loud, but it shows up consistent. Day after day, she keeps moving forward. Even when her heart is heavy, even when her mind is weary, even when the odds are stacked against her, she gets up anyway. She prays anyway. She shows up anyway. That strength doesn't come from motivation. It comes from resilience birthed in the secret place with God. And the enemy hates it because he can't trace it. He doesn't understand how she keeps pressing when the pressure increases. He doesn't understand how the pain hasn't made her bitter. He doesn't understand how she keeps praising when the storm rages. But what he doesn't know is that she's not running on her own power. She's drawing from a source deeper than her emotions, stronger than her circumstances, more powerful than anything she's facing. God said in his word, "My strength is made perfect in weakness." So every time she feels weak and leans into him, he pours fresh strength into her spirit. That strength doesn't just help her survive. It helps her thrive. It carries her when her flesh wants to quit. It sustains her when her resources are gone. It lifts her when the world tries to pull her under. People around her may be confused by her calm. They see the storm, but she's not panicking. They see the trial, but she's not collapsing. That's because she's anchored in something unshakable. Her faith isn't in what she sees. Her faith is in who God is. And when you know who your source is, your soul becomes unmovable. That's why she can walk through valleys with grace. That's why she can deal with delay without falling apart. That's why she can carry more than she talks about. Because her help doesn't come from man. Her help comes from the Lord. The enemy thought he could break her by applying pressure. He thought she'd fold when the finances got tight, when the relationships failed, when the diagnosis came in. But all he did was activate her prayer life. All he did was push her deeper into the presence of God. Because some women don't run from pain. They worship through it. They don't shut down in battle. They go to war in the spirit. And every time the enemy tried to crush her, all he did was reveal that what's in her is greater than what's against her. See, the strength God gives doesn't just protect her body. It fortifies her soul. It keeps her from giving up on her calling. It keeps her from believing the lies. It keeps her from lowering her standards to fit in with a world she was never designed to blend with. That's why she stands out. That's why she's still here. Not because life's been easy, but because God's been faithful. So when the enemy comes looking for weakness, he finds worship. When he comes expecting defeat, he finds discipline. When he thinks she's alone, he discovers she's backed by heaven. And when he tries to knock her down, God raises her up. Again and again, because that inner strength isn't from her. It's for her. It's God's protection wrapped in power, living on the inside. There's a sharpness in her spirit that can't be explained by experience alone. It's not street smarts. It's not a natural instinct. It's discernment. The spiritual sensitivity God gives to his daughters so they can recognize evil before it reaches their front door. When a woman is protected by God, he doesn't just shield her after the attack. He gives her vision to detect danger before it arrives. She may not be able to explain how she knows, but her spirit picks up what her eyes can't yet see. She has a holy alertness. Something inside her gets stirred when something around her is off. She walks into a room, and even when everyone's smiling, she senses what's real and what's fake. She can have a conversation with someone, and while they're saying all the right things, something in her spirit says, "Be careful." That's not paranoia. That's protection. The Holy Spirit gives her insight so she won't fall into traps dressed like blessings. You see, the enemy doesn't always show up in obvious ways. He doesn't always wear red horns and carry a pitchfork. Sometimes he comes wrapped in charisma. Sometimes he sounds like opportunity. Sometimes he hides in relationships that seem harmless on the surface. But this woman doesn't just look at what's presented. She listens to what's whispered in the spirit. She doesn't just fall for words. She tests the fruit. And if the fruit doesn't line up with God's truth, she walks away. Even if it looks good, even if it feels right, even if others don't understand. She knows that discernment is one of the highest forms of protection. Because once you can see the attack before it happens, you can avoid the fallout. Once you can feel the shift in someone's spirit, you know not to give them full access. That's how God keeps her steps ordered. He warns her in dreams. He stirs her spirit during prayer. He closes doors that look open, not to punish her, but to protect her. And she's learned to trust that inner check from the Holy Spirit more than she trusts external approval. Others might say she's being too cautious. They might tell her she's overthinking. But what they don't know is that she's been burned before. She's ignored the nudges before. She's let in people God told her to guard against. So now she's wiser. Now she pays attention. She doesn't wait for a scandal to protect her heart. She discerns the shift in the atmosphere and acts before the damage is done. And let's be clear, discernment doesn't make her judgmental. It makes her responsible. She's not condemning people. She's covering herself. She's not acting better than others. She's just being obedient to the Spirit of God within her. She doesn't walk around suspicious of everyone, but she's not wide open either. She has boundaries. She tests spirits. She doesn't move off emotion. She moves with clarity. That's why she avoids certain places. That's why she cuts off certain conversations. That's why she won't date just anyone, won't follow every trend, won't link up with every crowd. It's not about being antisocial. It's about being anointed. Her destiny is too important to entertain distractions. Her calling is too heavy to carry extra weight. So she discerns early and moves wisely. And when evil tries to disguise itself, when manipulation masks itself as love, when deception sounds like opportunity, When temptation dresses itself in comfort, she sees through it because God has trained her eyes to spot the counterfeit. And every time she obeys that inner warning, she dodges a bullet the enemy meant for her destruction. That's how you know she's protected. She doesn't just survive attacks, she avoids them. Because discernment is her defense, and God is her guide, whispering, "That's not for you. Walk away. Don't trust that. Stay close to me." And because she listens, she stays ahead of the enemy every time. A woman who is truly protected by God doesn't just pray when things get tough. Her prayer life is a fortress, a steady, unshakable connection to heaven that no enemy can break. It's not just about asking for things or crying out in desperation. It's a constant communion, a daily discipline, a lifeline that roots her soul in the presence of God. This kind of prayer life isn't seasonal. It's consistent, unwavering, and powerful. When the enemy comes with threats, he can't get past the prayers that have been lifted on her behalf. She might not see all the battles waged in the spirit realm, but her prayers are the front lines. And God responds because she has cultivated a habit of seeking him. It's not that she's perfect or always feels close. Sometimes her prayers are simple. Sometimes they're raw, but they are faithful. That faithfulness creates a spiritual hedge of protection around her life. The enemy hates prayer because it exposes his plans and shuts down his schemes. He despises when a woman is connected to heaven because that connection turns the tide of every fight. Prayer is the weapon she uses when all else fails. It's the secret that keeps her walking in peace even when chaos surrounds her. When others are overwhelmed by fear, she's anchored by the promises she's claimed in prayer. Her prayer life is not about bargaining with God, but about aligning her heart with his will. She prays for wisdom to navigate hard decisions, strength to endure long seasons, and grace to love even when it's difficult. She intercedes for others, recognizing that her prayers impact not only her life, but the lives of those around her. This kind of prayer life creates a spiritual atmosphere where God's presence dwells and evil finds no place to stand. And when she prays, it's not just words, it's a lifestyle. It's a posture of surrender, a declaration that she trusts God above all else. It's a refusal to be shaken by circumstances because she knows that her God is bigger than any problem. This is why she doesn't panic when doors close, when relationships fail, or when the future looks uncertain. Her prayer life is a steady anchor in a world that is constantly shifting, because prayer connects her to the ultimate source of power. She doesn't rely on her own strength or understanding. She brings her fears, her hopes, her dreams, and her battles before God and lets him do the heavy lifting. And in that surrender, she finds peace that surpasses understanding, peace that guards her heart and mind. Her prayers also reveal her priorities. They show where her heart truly is, and because she prays with intention, she walks in clarity. She doesn't get distracted by every loud voice or trend. She doesn't chase after empty promises or fleeting popularity. She prays for discernment, for protection, for provision, and for purpose. And those prayers guide her steps. That unshakable prayer life is what separates her from those who falter under pressure. It's what makes her unmovable when trials come. It's what fills her with hope when the night feels darkest. And it's what convinces the enemy to back off, knowing that his attacks will be met with spiritual resistance. She prays not because she's desperate, but because she's determined. She prays because she knows the power of persistent faith. She prays because she understands that prayer is the pathway to divine protection. And every time she falls to her knees, heaven answers. Let me tell you something today. When God places his hand of protection over a woman, no weapon formed against her can prosper. When the Most High shelters her under his wings, even hell itself has to back off. Because a woman covered by God walks in a divine authority, shielded not by fear, but by faith. And if you've ever wondered whether you're that kind of woman, here are 8 signs that you are protected by God from evil people. A woman protected by God doesn't rely solely on her natural senses to guide her relationships. She walks in spiritual discernment. That means she can see beyond what's being said, beyond what's being shown, and beyond the surface level charm. See, when the Spirit of God covers you, he doesn't just bless your ears. He sharpens your eyes. You begin to pick up on things other people miss. It's not about suspicion or paranoia. It's about being spiritually aware. There's a quiet alertness that settles in your spirit when something isn't right, even when everything looks perfect on the outside. Evil doesn't always come with a scowl or a threat. It often comes smiling, dressed in everything you thought you wanted. The enemy is strategic. He knows how to imitate what looks good, what sounds right, what feels familiar. But when you're protected by God, you're not moved by appearances. You don't just go by charisma, you look for character. You don't just listen for compliments, you listen for consistency. Because you understand that deception is the devil's favorite tool, and flattery is often its handle. A protected woman learns how to test the spirit behind a person. That means she asks, what's driving this connection? What's the fruit of this relationship? Is this person pushing me closer to God or pulling me further away? She's not impressed by status or style. She's tuned into the spirit. That doesn't mean she walks around judging everyone. No, she walks around discerning. And there's a big difference. Judgment comes from pride. Discernment comes from the Holy Spirit. Sometimes discernment isn't loud. It shows up as a hesitation in your gut, a check in your spirit, a moment of stillness when everything else is rushing. You may not be able to explain it right away. You may not have proof or evidence, but something deep inside tells you, wait. And a protected woman listens to that voice. She knows how to pause and pray before she proceeds. She trusts that if God is showing her a red flag, even if it's small, it's still a warning. What makes this discernment powerful is that it's not learned through textbooks, it's forged in prayer. It's strengthened in worship. It's honed in those quiet moments with God where your spirit becomes sensitive to His. When you spend time in the presence of the Lord, you get to know His voice. And once you know His voice, you can recognize when another voice doesn't line up. That's protection. Some people might think you're being too careful or too distant. Let them talk. Because you know that God's protection sometimes looks like distance. It looks like walking away from something that seems right but doesn't feel right in your spirit. It looks like saying no when your flesh wants to say yes. That's not fear, it's wisdom. And wisdom is one of the highest forms of protection a woman can walk in. So, don't ignore that discernment. Don't apologize for it. That's heaven guarding your heart in ways you can't even see. There are moments in life when plans fall apart, doors slam shut, and opportunities vanish. And at first, it feels like rejection. But when a woman is protected by God, she learns to recognize these moments not as losses, but as divine interruptions. What looked like a breakdown was really a breakthrough in disguise. What felt like a closed door was actually God's hand holding it shut, shielding her from what she couldn't yet understand. Because when God protects His daughters, He doesn't just remove enemies, He reroutes paths. A woman covered by divine favor doesn't cry long over detours. She might feel the sting for a moment, but deep down, she knows that nothing happens by accident. When that relationship crumbles, when that friendship fades, when that job opportunity slips away, she understands that there is something she couldn't see, but God could. He saw the hidden intentions, the quiet manipulation, the subtle destruction that was waiting down the line. And because He loves her, He stepped in. He interrupted it before it could take root. Sometimes God's protection is not loud. It doesn't come with lightning bolts or angelic announcements. It comes in the form of sudden cancellations, unanswered calls, a door that just won't open no matter how hard you knock. And while the world calls it failure, faith calls it covering. God knows how to block what isn't meant for you sometimes before you even know it's a threat. That's why a protected woman doesn't panic when her plans shift. She pauses. She prays. And she trusts that heaven's detour is safer than her own direction. And here's what makes it even more powerful: the peace that comes with it. See, when God interrupts your plans, He doesn't leave you empty. He fills you with a quiet assurance that doesn't make sense to those around you. You should be anxious, but you're calm. You should be bitter, but you're thankful. That's not natural, that's supernatural. There's God whispering, I've got you. It's a divine confirmation that even though things didn't go the way you expected, they're still going exactly as He intended. There are times when a woman protected by God looks back and realizes just how close she came to danger, how near she was to falling into something that would have wrecked her soul. But God in His mercy stepped in. He caused confusion in the plans of others to bring clarity to her purpose. He delayed the meeting that would have led to heartbreak. He interrupted the connection that would have drained her spiritually. And it wasn't rejection. It was redirection. It takes spiritual maturity to see this. Not everything that's good to you is good for you. And not every opportunity is a blessing. That's why when God interrupts, it's a form of grace. He's not withholding. He's protecting. He's not punishing. He's preserving. And a woman walking in his covering has learned to welcome divine interruption because she knows her steps are being ordered and her path is being secured by the one who sees the end from the beginning. When God places his protection over a woman, he doesn't just cover her in the spirit, he also surrounds her in the natural. One of the clearest signs that a woman is protected by God is the presence of God-fearing people in her life. She's not walking through this world alone. She has a circle, a covering, a community that watches with her, prays for her, and holds her accountable. And that's not random. That's intent. God places the right voices in her life so she can recognize his will even when her emotions are loud. A woman under divine protection will find herself connected to people who sharpen her, not drain her. These are friends who don't just agree with everything, friends who will tell her the truth in love. Mentors who aren't impressed by her gifts, but concerned about her growth. Spiritual sisters who will intercede when she's under attack and celebrate her victories without jealousy. That kind of circle is a hedge, a wall against the schemes of the enemy. Evil thrives in isolation. The enemy loves to corner a woman, make her feel alone, make her think no one understands her, so he can whisper lies without interruption. But a woman surrounded by God-fearing people is never truly alone. When her strength is low, her circle lifts her up. When her vision gets blurry, someone in her life speaks clarity. When she's tempted to compromise, someone reminds her of her calling. That kind of community is not just support, it's spiritual warfare. These people are not always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's the friend who checks in with a text at the perfect moment. Sometimes it's the mentor who speaks one word that brings everything back into focus. Sometimes it's a prayer warrior in her church who calls out her name when she doesn't even know it. God will use his people to shield her in ways she didn't even ask for. Because divine protection is not always about angels and visions. Sometimes it's about relationships. And here's the thing, those relationships require stewardship. A woman protected by God doesn't take her circle for granted. She listens. She stays connected. She doesn't isolate herself when correction comes, because she knows correction from a God-fearing voice is protection in disguise. She doesn't always agree immediately, but she prays about it. She weighs it against the word. And more often than not, she realizes that God is speaking to her through the people he placed around her. There's a spiritual covering that comes through alignment. When you're aligned with people who fear God, who walk in wisdom, and who are led by the Spirit, you find yourself protected from decisions you would have made alone. You're kept from detours that charm the flesh but destroy the soul. And even when the enemy tries to sneak in through offense or pride, that circle helps hold the line. So when a woman is protected by God, you'll see it in who surrounds her. Not just anybody can get close. Not everyone is allowed in. God makes sure of that. Because when the right people are around her, the wrong ones can't linger long. Vision white peace walks with peace. And while woman is truly protected by God, there's something unexplainable about the way she carries herself in the middle of chaos. She walks with peace. Not just a temporary calm or surface level stillness, but a deep set, not because she doesn't feel the weight of the situation, but because she knows who's carrying the weight with her. Peace in the midst of an attack. Is it natural? It's supernatural. It's not something you work up. It's something that is given when your trust is in the one who goes before you. Evil people may rise up against her. Gossip may surround her. Betrayal might even come from someone close. But instead of falling apart, she leans into the presence of God, into the promises of his word, into the quiet confidence that says, no matter what they do, God has the final say. This kind of woman understands that God never promised a life without trials, but he did promise his presence in the midst of them. And when you know God is with you, you stop needing the approval or acceptance of people. You stop reacting out of fear, and you start responding from a place of authority. The enemy wants her to break down, to lash out, to step out of character, but the peace of God becomes her restraint. It guards her heart. It protects her mind. It keeps her anchored when the storm is designed to make her drift. Sometimes people will wonder why she's not panicking. They'll expect her to retaliate, to speak up, to defend herself in the face of slander. But a woman covered by God knows that silence is often her greatest weapon. Not because she's weak, but because she trusts that God is fighting battles she can't see. Peace gives her the ability to choose stillness instead of striving, to stay focused instead of becoming distracted by petty warfare. The enemy hates that kind of peace because it's proof that his tactics aren't working. It means his threats have been neutralized. His fiery darts have hit the shield of faith, and now they're just sparks fading in the wind. That's what protection looks like in the spiritual realm. It's not just about being removed from trouble, it's about being sustained through it. And that's what this woman has learned to do. Walk through fire without getting burned. Move through betrayal without bitterness. Smile in the face of opposition without compromising her joy. Her peace isn't dependent on circumstances. It's rooted in the presence of God. She knows the battle's real, but her victory is already secure. And so she sleeps when others are anxious. She worships when others are worried. She stays rooted when others run. That's the mark of a woman protected by God. Not that the storm never comes, but that her soul remains calm in the middle of it and faced with delight. A woman who is protected by God doesn't just go through battles. She comes out of them delivered. That doesn't mean she never faces hardship or conflict. On the contrary, she often walks through deep valleys, painful betrayals, and fierce spiritual attacks. But the evidence of God's protection isn't the absence of struggle. It's the outcome of it. When evil tries to trap her, God makes a way of escape. When people plot her downfall, God uses their own plans to elevate her. When the fire is turned up, she walks through it without being consumed. That's what divine deliverance looks like. Every battle she's faced, every tear she's cried, every dark moment she's endured, it all becomes part of her testimony. And here's the thing, the devil doesn't fight what isn't a threat. So when a woman is constantly under attack, it's often a sign of the anointing she carries. But what sets her apart is that no matter how hard the enemy hits, she doesn't stay down. She may stumble, but she doesn't quit. She may bend, but she doesn't break. Why? Because God always steps in. And when he delivers, he doesn't just pull her out, he brings her out better, stronger, and wiser. There's something powerful about coming out of a storm with more faith than you had before. That's what happens when God is your protector. The trials don't make you bitter, they refine you. The attacks don't destroy you, they strengthen your discernment. That man who walked away, that friend who betrayed you, that opportunity that slipped through your fingers, it wasn't the end. It was a setup for your next level. A woman protected by God begins to recognize that some losses were really victories in disguise. She's not defined by what she's been through. She's defined by how God brought her through. Every spiritual trap, every emotional ambush, every attempt of the enemy to break her, God turned it around. He used the enemy's weapons to shape her into a warrior. That's why her praise is loud. That's why her walk is bold. She's been delivered too many times to stay quiet. She knows what it's like to be on the verge of giving up, and she knows what it's like to be rescued at the last moment. And the deliverance isn't always physical, it's emotional, mental, and spiritual. Sometimes God delivers her from the need for validation, from the fear of rejection, from the lies she once believed about herself. Sometimes he delivers her from toxic habits and unhealthy attachments that she didn't even know were weighing her down. And when she comes out, people wonder how she's still standing. They see her peace, her strength, her joy, and they don't understand that it was birthed through fire. A woman protected by God knows this truth. Evil may come, but it can't stay. Attacks may rise, but they won't prosper. Because every time the enemy says this will take her out, God says, watch me bring her out. And he does. Over and over again. When a woman is protected by God, one of the most powerful things you'll notice is that her spirit remains pure, even in the presence of evil. She doesn't let bitterness build a home in her heart. She doesn't allow resentment to take root. Even when people lie on her, cheat her, use her, or try to tear her down, she chooses forgiveness. That's not weakness. That's strength in its highest form, because when you forgive, you don't lose power. You gain freedom. You release yourself from the grip of what tried to break you. The enemy thrives in unforgiveness. He wants to contaminate your heart with pain until it poisons your perspective. He wants to use offense like a wedge between you and your destiny. But a woman under God's covering sees through that strategy. She doesn't deny the pain, but she doesn't let it dictate her future either. She understands that holding on to anger might feel good in the moment, but it will rot the soul over time. So she forgives not because they deserve it, but because she does. She deserves peace. She deserves freedom. She deserves to walk forward unchained. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's releasing. It's choosing to say, you don't get to have power over my thoughts anymore. And this kind of woman has been delivered from the need for revenge. She doesn't plot how to get even. She doesn't waste time trying to prove a point. She lets God be her defender. She knows that the God who sees everything also settles everything. And when he says, vengeance is mine, she takes him at his word. So instead of fighting battles that aren't hers, she focuses on the purpose God has for her life. That's the beauty of a protected woman. She stays clean in spirit even when the world tries to get her dirty. Her heart isn't filled with malice. Her words aren't laced with spite. She refuses to become what hurt her. She chooses to rise above it. That doesn't mean she's naive. She knows who to love from a distance. She knows who can't have access anymore. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation with everyone. It means liberation for herself. And when God sees a woman who chooses mercy over malice, he honors that. He pours out more grace, more peace, more protection. This kind of forgiveness makes her untouchable in the spirit. Because the enemy can't use what no longer controls her, she becomes a threat. Not because she fights dirty, but because she walks holy. Evil may come for her, but it can't stick to her. The lies bounce off. The betrayal can't hold her back. The wounds don't define her. Why? Because her spirit is guarded by God and her heart is surrendered to him. A pure spirit doesn't mean a perfect life. It means a protected one. She could walk into rooms where her name has been slandered and still hold her head high. She can smile at people who once hurt her and mean it. That's not pretending. That's power. That's what happens when a woman refuses to let evil shape her character. Instead, she lets God shape her heart. A woman is protected by God. Her steps are not just random movements. Her steps are ordered. There is a divine rhythm to her life. Even when things seem uncertain, she might not always know where she's going, but she knows who's leading. And that makes all the difference. Evil people may try to trap her, deceive her, or pull her into chaos, but they can't stop what's been divinely arranged. Because when God orders your steps, he also clears the path. Even if he has to move mountains, close doors, or reroute you entirely. She doesn't walk like someone who's guessing. She walks with spiritual precision. That's not because she has all the answers, but because she trusts the one who does. Her decisions are not made out of desperation, they're made out of discernment. She seeks God before she moves. She prays before she commits. She listens before she leaps. And even when she takes a wrong turn, grace meets her there. God doesn't abandon her. He redirects her. That's what protection looks like in motion. Sometimes protection is in the delay. Sometimes it's in the divine pause. While others are rushing ahead, trying to make things happen in their own strength, this woman knows how to wait on the Lord. She's learned that being out of step with God is more dangerous than standing still. So she doesn't chase every opportunity. She doesn't run after every relationship. And she doesn't move just because others are moving. She stays in sync with the Spirit, and that obedience becomes her shield. The enemy loves chaos. He wants confusion to cloud her judgment. He wants her rushing into things she wasn't called to, getting entangled in assignments that aren't hers. But a protected woman walks in divine timing. That means she might miss what others call perfect timing, because she's following a higher clock. And what looks like delay is often God's design, because he knows what's ahead. He knows what's waiting down the road. And when he orders your steps, he's not just thinking about your now, he's protecting your next. There are moments when she looks back and realizes, if I had gone where I wanted to go, I would have ended up in a mess. But God blocked it. He shut it down. He didn't let it prosper. And at the time, it was frustrating, but now she can see it for what it really was, divine redirection. God kept her from the wrong place, the wrong people, and the wrong timing, because he had something better, something protected, something purposed. Even her setbacks are used for alignment. Even the detours turn into lessons. That's why a woman protected by God doesn't envy someone else's path. She knows hers is handcrafted by heaven. She doesn't panic when things don't happen on her timeline. She understands that if God is truly ordering her steps, then wherever she ends up will be exactly where she's meant to be. And nothing, no person, no scheme, no setback can block what God has already prepared for her. When a woman is protected by God, there's a spiritual authority that rests on her life. She doesn't have to announce it. She doesn't have to prove it. It shows up in the way she moves, the way she speaks, and the way she prays. Evil people can sense it. Demonic forces recognize it. She may not look intimidating in the natural, but in the spirit, she's a warrior. That authority isn't loud. It's rooted. It's not based on personality or position. It's based on intimacy with God. The more time she spends with him, the more power she walks in. This kind of woman doesn't fight like the world fights. She doesn't waste energy arguing with people who don't understand her purpose. She doesn't get distracted by every attack that comes her way. She's been taught to take it to the throne, not the timeline. When warfare rises, she doesn't panic, she prays. She doesn't just pray casually either. She prays with fire, with boldness, with scripture in her mouth and faith in her heart. That's why the enemy trembles when she kneels. Her words carry weight in heaven because her life is aligned with God's will. Their authority is not in how many scriptures she can quote, but in how much she believes them. When she speaks, she declares the word, not her worries. She's not just hoping things change, she's commanding it. She knows the power of speaking life. She knows how to bind and loose. She knows that her words can build or break, and she chooses to use them to build the kingdom. That kind of spiritual discipline doesn't just happen. It's cultivated in private, in moments when no one is watching but God. A woman under divine protection doesn't entertain every spirit. She's discerning. She recognizes when something is off, even if it looks right on the surface. She doesn't just listen with her ears, she listens with her spirit. She can walk into a room and sense the atmosphere. She can feel the shift when something is trying to infiltrate her peace. And instead of shrinking back, she rises up. That's spiritual authority. Not arrogance, not control, but God-given power to stand her ground and declare, not here, not today, not on my watch. Evil can't operate freely around her because her presence demands accountability. People can't just lie, gossip, or manipulate without something being exposed. That's not because she's trying to uncover them. It's because the light she carries makes it impossible for darkness to hide. And while some people may feel uncomfortable around her, others feel drawn to her because they see the strength, the peace, and the favor that surround her. They may not understand it, but they respect it. That's what it looks like when God places his authority on a woman. She becomes a spiritual gatekeeper, one who watches, prays, and stands in the gap. She's not easily moved, not easily fooled, and not easily broken. Evil may try to approach her, but it won't succeed. Because when God has given a woman authority, no demon in hell can override it, and no person on earth can strip it. Her life becomes a testimony of what it looks like to walk covered, walk called, and walk in power.